the frost before the storm. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, smoothing down the satin of my wedding gown. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of dread that had been building inside me for months. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I was marrying Julian, the man I had loved for 3 years, the man who held my hand when the world felt too heavy. But as I looked at my reflection, I didn't see a glowing bride. I saw a woman preparing for battle. Outside the heavy mahogany doors of the bridal suite, the soft strings of a harp echoed down the hallway of the Grand Crest Manor. It was one of the most exclusive venues in the state, a soaring estate built of gray stone, surrounded by acres of rolling green hills and manicured rose gardens. To anyone watching from the outside, this was a fairy tale wedding. A simple, modest girl marrying into one of the oldest, wealthiest families in the region. But behind closed doors, fairy tales don't exist. My name is Clara. For the past 3 years, I've lived 2 lives. To the world, and especially to Julian's mother, Victoria Vance, I was a nobody. I was a quiet girl from a humble background, working a modest job, living in a small apartment, wearing off-brand clothes, and driving a 10-year-old sedan. Victoria treated me like dirt from the moment Julian brought me to her penthouse for dinner. I can still hear her voice from that first evening. She hadn't even offered me a seat. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a glass of aged wine, looking down her nose at me through her designer glasses. "Julian," she had said, not even bother to look me in the eye. "Who is this girl? Did you find her at a soup kitchen? Look at her shoes. Look at her handbag. She smells of cheap ambition." Julian had tried to defend me. "Mom, stop it. Clara is amazing. She works hard, she's sweet, and I love her." "Love," Victoria had laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the room like a razor. "You don't know what love is, Julian. Girls like her don't fall in love with men. They fall in love with last names. She sees the Vance estate, she sees our history, and she sees a free ride for the rest of her miserable life." That night was the beginning of a long, painful nightmare. For 3 years, Victoria made it her personal mission to break me. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every chance she got, she humiliated me. She would deliberately order expensive wines and ask me to pronounce the French names, laughing when I stumbled. She would buy extravagant gifts for Julian's friends and give me cheap, second-hand trinkets or leftover discount coupons. She invited Julian's wealthy ex-girlfriends to family dinners right in front of me, making sure everyone knew who she wished Julian was with. Through it all, I stayed silent. I swallowed my pride. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. Julian begged me to be patient. "She's just protective, Clara," he would whisper late at night, holding me close. "She lost my dad years ago, and she built this entire family empire on her back. She just needs time to see who you really are. Please, just hold on for me." So I held on. I suffered in silence because I believed Julian was worth it. I thought love could conquer her arrogance. What Victoria Vance didn't know, what nobody in that arrogant family knew, was that I had a secret. A secret so massive that it could crumble Victoria's entire universe with a single word. I didn't need the Vance family name. I didn't need their money, and I certainly didn't need Victoria's approval. I was playing a long game. I wanted to see if Julian's love was real, or if he would eventually bow down to his mother's cruelty. I wanted to see how far Victoria would go before her hubris consumed her entirely. And today was the day she crossed the line of no return. The mask of high society. The double doors of the bridal suite opened, and in walked my mother-in-law-to-be. Victoria Vance was 60, but she carried herself with the terrifying grace of a queen who ruled with an iron fist. She wore a ice blue silk gown that probably cost more than a small car, tailored so sharply it looked like armor. Diamonds encircled her throat, sparkling under the warm chandelier light. Behind her walked her daughter, Chloe, Julian's younger sister, who had inherited all of her mother's vanity and none of her intelligence. Victoria didn't smile as she looked at me in my dress. Instead, her eyes swept down my frame with absolute disgust. "Look at you," Victoria sneered, stepping closer. The faint scent of expensive lavender and cold cruelty drifted off her. "You actually had the audacity to put on white. You look like a maid who snuck into the master's bedroom and put on the lady's clothes." Chloe snickered from behind her, holding her phone up as if taking a photo to mock me later. "Mom, don't insult the maids. At least maids earn an honest wage. She's just a leech." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, taking a deep, slow breath. The anger inside me burned hot, but I kept my posture straight. I turned to face Victoria directly. "Victoria, today is Julian's wedding day," I said, my voice steady, calm, and deliberate. "If you cannot show me respect as his bride, then please step out of this room. Julian is waiting downstairs." Victoria took 2 quick steps forward, stopping inches from my face. Her dark eyes narrowed into slits. "Respect? You demand respect from me? In my own world. Let me make something very clear to you, Clara. You think because Julian put a ring on your finger, you've secured the jackpot. You think you're going to move into our family penthouse, drive our cars, and live off the legacy my late husband built." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are nothing. You come from nothing, and you will leave with nothing. Today is not a celebration of love. Today is the day I make sure everyone knows exactly what you are." "Is that a threat, Victoria?" I asked, staring straight into her icy eyes without flinching. "It's a promise," she hissed. "Enjoy your little walk down the aisle, dear, because after today your fairy tale ends." She turned on her heel, her silk dress rustling aggressively against the marble floor as she stormed out, Chloe following right behind her like a faithful lapdog. When the door clicked shut, the room fell dead silent. My maid of honor, my childhood friend Sarah, rushed over to me, her face pale with rage. "Clara, how can you take that?" Sarah gasped, clutching my hands. "She's evil. Why don't you just tell her right now? Why are you letting her walk all over you like this? Tell her who you really are. Cancel the wedding." I looked at Sarah in the mirror. I slowly smoothed down the lace on my dress. A slow, cold smile crept onto my lips, a smile Sarah had rarely seen on me before. "No, Sarah," I whispered softly. "If I tell her now, she will hide. She will make excuses. She will run away and pretend to be the victim. People like Victoria Vance only learn when their destruction is public, total, and undeniable." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, her breath catching in her throat. "I am going to walk down that aisle," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "I am going to say my vows. And when she tries her little stunt because I know she has something planned, I am going to strip away every single lie she has built her life on." I picked up my bouquet of white roses. My fingers didn't tremble anymore. The dread was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. Victoria thought she was setting a trap for me. She had no idea that she was walking directly into a cage I had built for her 3 years ago. The day everything shattered. The ceremony took place in the glass conservatory of the estate. Sunbeams streamed through the massive glass panels, illuminating 200 of the state's most influential figures, CEOs, politicians, high society socialites, and media executives. All of them were Victoria's high society friends. Julian stood at the altar in a tailored tuxedo, looking handsome, but nervously wiping sweat from his forehead. When the music started and I walked down the aisle, I could feel the whispers rippling through the crowd. "That's the girl. She looks so ordinary. I heard her family doesn't even own a house. Poor Victoria, having her son marry a gold digger." Victoria sat in the front row, wearing a satisfied, triumphant smile. She didn't look at me with hate anymore. She looked at me with the smug delight of a cat that had already caught the mouse. Julian took my hand at the altar. His hand was freezing. "You look beautiful, Clara," he whispered, but his eyes darted nervously toward his mother in the front row. Throughout the ceremony, Julian seemed distracted, terrified of making a wrong move under his mother's watchful gaze. Every time the minister spoke about love and unity, Victoria made a quiet, dramatic sigh that could be heard in the first 3 rows. Yet I stayed calm. I said my vows clearly, holding Julian's hand, giving him one last chance to stand up, to be a man, to show me that he was strong enough to protect our future. When the minister finally pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was polite, cold, and brief. An hour later, the reception began in the main ballroom. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Guests moved around sipping $500 champagne, but all eyes were constantly shifting toward the main stage, where a massive, 5-tier custom wedding cake stood. It was an absolute masterpiece of sugar art, decorated with gold leaf and handcrafted sugar flowers, costing thousands of dollars. Suddenly, Victoria stepped up to the microphone on the central platform. She tapped the glass with her silver spoon, ringing out across the grand hall. The music faded, and the 200 guests went silent, turning their attention to the matriarch of the Vance family. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests," Victoria began, her voice echoing through the crystal speakers. She held her wine glass high, putting on her best aristocratic charm. "Thank you for joining us today. As you all know, the Vance family has a long, proud history in this city. My late husband built our name on honor, integrity, and extreme wealth. We have always maintained the highest standards." She paused, turning her cold gaze directly onto me. "Which brings me to my new daughter-in-law, Clara." An uncomfortable hush fell over the room. Julian stepped forward nervously. "Mom, what are you doing?" he whispered, trying to reach for the microphone. Victoria pulled the microphone away from him, glaring at him until he froze in his tracks. "Julian, sit down and let your mother speak," she commanded loudly, her voice sharp enough to make him back away. She looked back at the audience, her smile turning into a cruel mask. "Clara came into my son's life with nothing. No family legacy, no money, no background. For 3 years, I watched her cling to my son, pushing him, tricking him, leeching off his kindness. She thinks that today, by tricking him into marrying her, she has secured her financial freedom forever." Gasps erupted through the crowd. People began pulling out their phones, recording. Julian stood frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment, but he didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. He just stood there, paralyzed by fear of his mother. Victoria stepped down from the platform and walked slowly toward the wedding cake. She grabbed a heavy metal cake server from the table. "Clara," Victoria said, her voice amplified across the entire ballroom as she walked up to me. "You want a piece of the Vance wealth. You want to taste luxury." Before anyone could react, Victoria raised her arm and slammed her hand directly into the 5-tier wedding cake. She scooped up a massive, messy fistful of cake, cream, and thick sugar, and smashed it straight into my face. Tears in the mirror. The impact was heavy and loud. White icing, thick batter, and gold leaf covered my face, my hair, and splattered across the front of my white lace dress. The cold frosting stuck to my skin, blinding my right eye. The entire ballroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Victoria stood over me, wiping her hands on a linen napkin with absolute disgust. Her face was twisted in a look of pure, unadulterated, malicious triumph. "There," Victoria shouted, her voice ringing out so everyone could hear. "That is the only piece of wealth you will ever taste in this family, you gold-digging parasite. Look at you. You look like the trash you are." Chloe burst out laughing from the front table, leading a few snickers from Victoria's high society friends. Flashbulbs went off as people took photos and videos of me standing there, covered in cake, publicly ruined in front of 200 wealthy spectators. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't run away weeping into the night like Victoria expected me to. Instead, I slowly reached up with my gloved hand and wiped the thick icing away from my eyes. I looked over at Julian. My new husband was standing 2 feet away from me. He had cake batter splattered on his shoes. He looked at me, then looked at his mother, and then he looked down at the floor. "Julian," I said softly, my voice calm despite the mess on my face. "Are you going to say anything?" Julian swallowed hard. He stammered, looking around at the judges, the CEOs, his mother's powerful friends. "Clara, just go to the bathroom and clean up. Mom is just emotional. Don't make a scene." "Don't make a scene." Those 4 words from Julian broke whatever tiny piece of hope I had left for him. He wasn't a man caught in the middle. He was a coward who would always allow his mother to destroy anyone who loved him. I looked at Victoria. She was smirking, satisfied that she had completely crushed me, asserting her absolute dominance over her son and his new bride. "Is that all you've got, Victoria? I asked quietly. Victoria's smirk faded slightly, replaced by confusion at my lack of tears. Excuse me. I took the linen napkin from a nearby waiter's tray, slowly and carefully wiping the frosting off my cheek, my neck, and my hands. I stepped up to the central platform, reaching out and taking the microphone directly out of the stand. The crowd gasped. Victoria's eyes widened in shock as I took center stage, covered in sugar and ruined lace, but standing taller than anyone else in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I spoke into the microphone. My voice echoed loudly, crystalline, smooth, and chillingly confident. My mother-in-law, Victoria Vance, has just given a very moving speech about the Vance family legacy, their extreme wealth, and their high standards. I turned my head and looked directly into Victoria's eyes. So, before we cut the rest of the cake, I think it's time we talk about who actually pays for those standards. Unraveling the web. Victoria sneered, taking a step toward the stage. Give me that microphone, you crazy girl. Security, escort this gold digger out of my venue. 2 large security guards in black suits moved forward from the doors. But before they could take 3 steps, my maid of honor, Sarah, stepped into their path holding a thick leather briefcase. She opened it and handed me a folder filled with official documents stamped with red wax seals. I raised my hand, pointing directly at the security guards. I wouldn't take another step if I were you, I said firmly into the microphone, because I am the owner of this venue, and if you touch me, you will be fired, blacklisted, and prosecuted for assault on my property. The security guards froze instantly. Whispers broke out across the room like a sudden wildfire. What is she talking about? Owner of Grand Crest Manor. Victoria let out a loud, mocking laugh, though her voice quivered slightly. Owner, are you insane? Grand Crest Manor is owned by Apex Global Investments, a multi-billion-dollar private holding firm. You are a broke, pathetic nobody who lives in a rented apartment. You're right about one thing, Victoria, I said, opening the red folder. Grand Crest Manor is indeed owned by Apex Global Investments, but what you don't know, what you never bothered to check, because you were too busy looking at my shoes, is who owns Apex Global. I pulled out a document and held it up to the spotlight. 5 years ago, I continued, my voice calm and clinical, the Vance family empire Vance Enterprises went completely bankrupt. Your late husband made disastrous investments in offshore real estate. You were months away from losing your penthouse, your luxury cars, your clothes, and your social standing. You were facing total financial ruin. Victoria's face drained of all color. The smug smile evaporated from her lips. The room fell so quiet you could hear the wind rustling the trees outside the glass windows. Mom, what is she talking about? Chloe asked, her voice high and panicked. That's not true. Dad left us millions. Shut up, Chloe, Victoria hissed, her voice shaking violently. She glared up at me on stage, her hands trembling. Clara, stop this madness right now. You are making up lies. Am I asked, lifting another page. 5 years ago, an anonymous investment group stepped in and bought 90% of Vance Enterprises' debt. They saved your family from public embarrassment. They paid off your mortgages. They funded Julian's business ventures. They paid for your private jet trips, your designer dresses, and your gold leaf wedding cake. I looked down at Julian, whose face was now as pale as paper. That anonymous investment group was Apex Global, I said. And I am the founder, majority shareholder, and CEO of Apex Global. The ultimate showdown. A collective shockwave hit the room. Several high society guests stood up from their chairs in utter disbelief. The wealthy bankers and executives in the audience knew the name Apex Global very well. It was one of the most powerful private investment funds in the country. No, that's impossible, Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. You're lying. You work a basic job, you drive a beat-up car, you live in a tiny apartment. I saw it. I lived simply because I value humility, hard work, and genuine human connection. I responded calmly into the microphone. I didn't reveal my wealth to Julian because I wanted to know if he loved me for who I was or for my money. I wanted to see if he was a real man who could stand on his own 2 feet and protect the woman he promised to love. I looked at Julian. Tears were streaming down his face, but they weren't tears of love, they were tears of sudden, crushing realization. And what did I find? I continued, my voice echoing off the high stone walls. I found a man who let his mother insult me every single day. A man who watched his mother treat me like garbage for 3 years and said nothing. And today, on our wedding day, when his mother smashed a cake into my face and publicly disgraced me, he stood there and told me not to make a scene. Julian took 2 steps toward the stage, reaching his hands out desperately. Clara, baby, please. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I love you. Please, let's go talk in private. Don't call me baby, Julian, I said, my voice cold as ice. You showed me exactly who you are. You didn't fail a test of wealth. You failed a test of character. I turned my attention back to Victoria, who was now leaning against a table, clutching her pearls, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Now, let's talk about the Vance family legacy, Victoria, I said smoothly. Since Apex Global owns 90% of Vance Enterprises, that means I own your family business. I own the penthouse you live in. I own the Benz you drove here today. And I own the land under your feet. I pulled out a final sheet of paper from the folder. 30 minutes ago, before I walked down the aisle, my legal team finalized the immediate board restructuring of Vance Enterprises. Effective immediately, Victoria Vance is removed from all honorary board positions. Her corporate credit cards have been canceled. The lease on the Vance penthouse is revoked, effective at midnight tonight. You can't do this, Victoria screamed, her voice echoing in absolute terror. She stumbled toward the stage, almost tripping over her silk dress. You can't kick me out of my house. You can't ruin me. I didn't ruin you, Victoria, I replied softly. You ruined yourself the moment you believed that money gave you the right to destroy other people's dignity. The falling empire. The ballroom exploded into chaos. The very same high society friends who had laughed with Victoria minutes earlier were now pulling away from her as if she carried a contagious plague. In the world of high society, power is everything. And in a matter of 5 minutes, Victoria Vance had transformed from a powerful matriarch into a penniless, homeless woman standing in a room full of people she had spent years looking down upon. Chloe was crying hysterically, pulling on her mother's arm. Mom, do something, tell her she's wrong. Where are we going to live? Victoria couldn't answer. Her face was bright red, tears smearing her expensive mascara, her arrogant posture completely collapsed. She looked around the room desperately, seeking help from her wealthy peers, but every single person turned their backs, pulling out their phones to document her catastrophic fall from grace. Julian ran up to the edge of the stage, falling to his knees before me, grabbing the hem of my cake-stained wedding gown. Clara, please, Julian sobbed, his voice raw with panic. I'm sorry, I was wrong, I should have defended you. I'll cut my mother off right now, I'll never speak to her again, just please, give me another chance, we're married. I looked down at Julian. My heart didn't ache anymore. The love I had felt for him for 3 years had completely dissolved, replaced by a deep, profound pity. We aren't married, Julian, I said quietly, taking the microphone off its stand one last time. Because while you were busy trying to appease your mother, you forgot to sign the official marriage license back in the suite. The paperwork was never submitted. Legally, I am still Clara Vance free. Julian dropped his head into his hands, weeping uncontrollably on the floor. I looked out over the crowd of 200 shocked guests. The reception is over, I announced into the microphone. Everyone, please enjoy the catered food on your way out. But as for Victoria and Julian Vance, security will escort you off my estate immediately. 4 large security personnel stepped forward, no longer hesitating. They firmly took Victoria and Julian by the arms. Victoria tried to struggle, screaming curses, but her voice was drowned out by the murmur of the crowd and the sound of cameras clicking. She was dragged out of the grand conservatory, her ice blue dress dragging through the dirt and crushed cake on the floor. I stepped down from the platform. Sarah met me at the base of the stairs, holding a warm coat. She wrapped it around my shoulders, wiping a tear of pride from her eye. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked softly. I looked at my reflection in one of the tall glass windows. I was still covered in wedding cake and ruined lace, but for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely, wonderfully free. "I feel clean," I whispered. A new dawn. 2 weeks later, the story of the Vance family downfall was still the biggest news in the city's business circles. Without the financial cushion of Apex Global, Victoria Vance had to sell off her expensive jewelry and designer clothes just to pay off her mounting personal debts. She moved into a small, rented 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, the very kind of neighborhood she used to mock. Julian tried to contact me dozens of times, sending letters, flowers, and waiting outside my office building. But I never answered. He had to learn the hardest lesson of his life, that spineless loyalty to cruelty costs you the only real love you will ever find. He ended up taking an entry-level job at a mid-sized firm, finally learning what it meant to earn a living without his family's safety net. As for me, I liquidated the Vance family assets that Apex Global held and donated 70% of the proceeds to local women's shelters and education funds for underprivileged youth. I didn't need their legacy, nor did I want their toxic money. Looking back at everything that happened, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel a sense of quiet justice. Arrogance is a quiet trap. People who spend their lives looking down on others often forget that the ground they stand on can crumble at any second. True power isn't about designer clothes, expensive venues, or looking down on those who have less. True power lies in staying humble, protecting your dignity, and knowing exactly who you are when nobody is watching. Victoria thought she was smashing a cake into the face of a helpless, poor girl. Instead, she shattered the mirror of her own illusions. Thank you so much for listening to today's story on Calm Girl Stories. If this story reminded you of the importance of self-respect, inner strength, and standing up against cruelty, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more empowering stories to light every single week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and leave a comment below letting us know your thoughts on Clara's journey. This story is inspired by real experiences. We believe that every story carries a lesson that can bring light to others. To protect everyone's privacy, our editors may change names, locations, and certain details while keeping the heart of the story true. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and thank you for watching.